I want to start by kind of throwing a concept out to you that I've been kind of working around for several years now, which is the thought of us all being branded in a way. And the concept of branding is an uncomfortable one. I mean, we all know how livestock is branded. It's ugly, it's painful, it's causes a mutilation of multiple pieces of flesh and body and bone, and really kind of takes a canvas that is in most ways perfect and alters it. And this thought of branding for me has really kind of come to the forefront as I've been a part of this show and talked with a lot of people. And I think that when it comes to branding, we're all kind of branded in a way. We're all marked in a way. We are branded by the mantras of the people that raised us. We're branded by the things that they told us, or the way that they raised us, or the messages that came into our ears through the words they said. If I were to talk about the way in which I was branded by the people that raised me, my brand would read, "I am just not ever good enough." We're branded by the experiences that we have in our youth. We're branded by the crazy things that we did when we were young that we didn't know any better about. I would be a boundary pusher all day. Boundary pusher, branded on my arm. We're branded by kind of the ways in which we travel through the world. I travel a lot for my job, so I might brand myself with a compass or my frequent flyer number for Delta. I think we're branded by the spiritual teachings that are ingrained in us. We're branded by the things that we're told and we're taught and we're kind of pounded into our heads as we're growing up. My brand would likely read, do, and once you've done enough, God will bless you. But do first. And then I think we're branded by the experiences that we've had, whether that's going to war, or fighting for justice, or surviving rape, or incest, or abuse. The branding that tells us that we're required to experience things before we can have the grit that gives us validity. But because branding is pervasive, and because branding is hard and painful, we have a really hard time kind of segregating that from the goodness of what life has provided us long term, and the places that we have arrived to because of the ways in which we're branded. And so I want you to kind of hold on to that thought of being branded, seared, flesh burnt, hurt, mutilated. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Faithmarks. So my name is Anna Golladay. As I was introduced, I am a native of Virginia, was born and raised there, lived there the large majority of my life until I relocated to Chattanooga, Tennessee about 5 years ago. I didn't think that a change in scenery for me in my life at that point, in my late 30s, was that big a deal. It has single-handedly changed my life. And when I got to Chattanooga, I met up with a boy who had a husband. So I had a husband too, so neither one of us could do anything about that. But what that did was form a partnership that really was one for the ages. And that guy's name is Carl Green. He is my co-collaborator in the Faithmarks movement. And he and I are the kind of creative minds behind Faithmarks. We had this crazy thought one day that we wanted people to have a way to tell the stories of their ink, to tell the stories around what it is that their tattoos mean. Because for those of you that are inked, or for those of you that have children that are inked, or know people that are inked, the vast majority of us do not get tattoos just for shits and giggles. We don't just walk into a studio and say, you know what, I've always wanted to get a tattoo. Artist, you do whatever you want. Doesn't matter to me. Anything's fine. And when you walk out of there with a stein full of German beer on your forearm, you're a little perplexed as to why the artist gave you that. Those things don't normally happen. There are instances of drunken spring break episodes, of course. But for the most part, there are stories that are attached to the ink that we have. There are stories that are ingrained in that art. And so Carl and I had this crazy concept that we could find a way to do that we could find a way to tell those stories. And we went through a couple of iterations. Do we make photographs and write a book? Do we build a website and they will come? I mean, all of the things that kind of go through that creative process as you're trying to figure out what a project starts to look like. And the more we thought about it, the more we realized that the concept of telling your story around your ink had to be interactive. It had to be a way in which spiritual conversations are sparked. It had to be a way in which we are able, as humans, to not just view the beauty of the ink, but then talk about that ink in ways in which can be transformative. And so we started with this thought of, okay, let's do an art show. Let's partner with a photographer here in Chattanooga. Let's find some models that have really great ink. Let's take their picture, let's tell their story, and let's see what happens. And it really was that simple. The problem is that Carl and I have an inability to do anything halfway. And so what started as this little crazy idea of let's build an art show turned into 100 people gallery style opening, complete with DJ and a band and food and drink and live tattooing on site, and started the momentum behind the Faithmarks movement in a way that we didn't expect. So in 2013, this idea was birthed. We launched the first series of the Faithmarks images in 2013, and there were 22 models. We did a call for models on the internet. Quite a few of them are local to the Chattanooga area, but we had people that came into town to get photographed, to be a part of this, much to our surprise, honestly. And then we decided that in order to not kind of cause a staleness around the show, we were going to take a year off. We were going to let the first round of Faithmarks kind of simmer, permeate into the spectrum, and then in 2015 we launched what we call phase 2, and we added another 19 images to the traveling show, and did the gallery style opening all over again, and had a whole bunch more people than we even expected the second time around, and it brings us to today. That phase 2 opening was in March of this year, and so the images that are being seen here at Wild Goose, this is only the second time publicly that they've been unveiled. They were seen at the opening in Chattanooga, and then they're being seen today. We knew we wanted the show to travel. We knew that keeping the show in a closet in Chattanooga was not going to benefit us. It was not going to benefit the people that needed to see it. And so we, from the very beginning, said, let's figure out a way that we can make this mobile. So all of the images are sized so that UPS can very easily pick them up and move them places. These images are actually smaller than the originals. We've got a set of original canvases that we keep only in Chattanooga, and they are 4 feet wide by 3 feet tall. They are massive, beautiful, impactful images. They're the same images, but they are not travel friendly, unless I can literally pack them up and drive them someplace. So the show travels. It has been to a couple of different places. In the last year, it went to the C21 conference in Denver. It has been to a couple of universities. It went to Maryville University. It went to a university in Nashville. And it's ready to go. It's ready to travel. It's already booked for a month-long stint at the University of Minnesota this coming fall. God willing, it's gonna travel to Ohio as well. We have a lot of interest in it. The goal is for it to move. We really want it to move. But understanding that, I think the thing that got us to this point, and it was funny, I read the description of what I was supposed to talk about in the program, and it wasn't what I had thought that I was going to talk about. So I thought, well, I'll just give you guys Q&A at the end, and if I don't cover something, you can just ask the question. The booklet said you were going to talk about XYZ, Anna. Can you speak to that? I'm happy to. But I think that what we found out through the people that have shared their stories with us and the communication that we've had is Faithmarks is ultimately a celebration of how people that are initially branded turn that into a mark of beauty. And so we have taken and internalized, those of us that are inked, and I have 4, I'm happy to show you 3 of them. Those of us that are branded in our lives have taken that scar and have internalized it into a beautiful celebration of creativity and art that we are willing to put on our body and tell a story about. The ink doesn't cover up the brand, but it is a physical manifestation of the branding that has happened to us in our lives. And going back to that painful, searing, scar-inducing branding and manifesting that into something beautiful and something colorful and something worthy of telling a story about is what gives this show life. It's what makes it impactful. It's what causes it to have interest. So a little bit of interesting facts and whatnot. Tattoos were first introduced to the United States during the Civil War. There was a German artist, his name was Martin Hildebrand, and he was a part of the Civil War infantry, came over to fight, and was actually giving tattoos to Confederate and Union soldiers in their camps. And that's how tattooing first made its way into the US. It kind of hit its golden age in the 1940s. When soldiers were coming back from overseas, they were all inked. They had kind of found their reason to ink themselves based on the camaraderie and the service that they were providing to the country overseas. And they were coming back and they were inked, and that's really when domestic tattooing kind of started its acceleration. It's estimated that 285 million Americans are inked and have been inked. And of that, I want to make sure I have this number right. Yes, okay. So 40% of all Americans that were born between 1961 and 1981 have got a tattoo. So if you are part of that kind of Gen X, really late boomer, Gen X, early Gen Y, the likelihood that you have a tattoo is 4 in 10. Most of us know that to be true. And that study was actually done about 4 years ago. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if those numbers were greater, because I think those of us, specifically those of us that are Gen Xers, are getting tattoos in record numbers, kind of as we equate that branding to creative solution. And so I think that as Carl and I started this process of figuring out how we could transition the spiritual conversation of tattooing into the mainstream, a lot of people ask me, well, what happened in your church when you decided that you wanted to have an art show and you had some older people in your congregation who said, wait a minute, you're going to do what? You're going to put a show up about what? You're going to talk about tattooing? in this sanctuary, on these grounds? How's that going to work? And why do we want to be on board about it? And so having those spiritual conversations within your congregations and in your community centers is what has enabled us to bridge those generational gaps. It really has made a huge difference. And so as we started to explain to our older members, and don't get me wrong, it's not only our more senior members that had issues with it. There were younger members who just don't understand the tattoo community, don't understand the kind of the concept of branding versus being marked. We had to start to explain that being able to spark those spiritual conversations and engage with people in our communities that are not necessarily spiritually focused or even interested in knowing what's going on within the walls of the church that's in their neighborhood, that those conversations can build a bridge. They can fill that gap. They can spark a need within a community that has normally turned itself off to the church or the concept of a spiritual renewal within their own lives. And so I think that as we have moved forward and as we've kind of started to have the show go on the road and have talked to people all over the country, that's the thing that is starting to resonate, is that the ability to show that young people and older people alike are not simply marking their bodies for the sake of just doing it. There's an intentionality behind it, has been a really big thing for us. And I think that we know that God seeks to form that reconciliation with us. We know that God seeks to fill in the gaps in our lives real time. We know that God seeks and aggressively pursues us in a way that makes all of what we're doing whole and filled. And we know that God has already etched himself on our skin. We have now translated that into our ability to take the branding that we've received and move it into a way that then also honors the grace and the blessing that God has given us to be able to kind of rise up out of that. So that's kind of the story about the show. I did want to highlight just these two images because I think what's important most about the show is the stories that go along with them. If you visit the tent across the way, you'll notice that all of the images are actually partnered with a story. So the story that was written by the model included. And I hope that you will find, as most do, that it's the story that is more impressive in most ways than the image itself. The ink can be beautiful. The artist can have represented that tattoo in a way that you have never seen before, and you can ooh and ah over it. But when you read the story that goes along with the ink that person has put on themselves, I would challenge you to walk away unchanged. I don't think it's possible. So this is Mandy. Mandy came to us as a kind of a blind model submission. We put out a call for models and we said, hey, this is what we're doing. This is this crazy project we have. Do you want to be a part of it? If you do, get in touch with us. And we really hoped that people would call because we didn't know what we'd do if we didn't have the models to show up. Mandy came to us and she said, I am 27 years old. I joined a gang when I was 16. I ran with people who changed me in ways that I am not proud to admit. And 5 years ago, when I turned 22, I met a boy and I met a God that would change that for me. And so as you look at Mandy's image, she's got the crown of David and a heart that's got some Japanese script in it. She's got 2 Timothy tattooed below that. She's got this beautiful rose of Sharon and a dove on her shoulder. Every single one of these images, with the exception of the Timothy script and the dove, covers up one of the gang tattoos that Mandy received between the ages of 16 and 21. She, with intentionality, took the branding of her life and changed it into a mark of faith. Took the branding that she had received, both emotionally and physically, and moved it into a different space. And you can read Mandy's whole story in the tent. This image is of Hannah, a girl I'm quite fond of. You can meet her over across the way too if you want. Hannah is a young woman who grew up being bullied. She was a tomboy. She had some physical issues growing up, and just simply wasn't loved on the way she should have been, except for by one person, and that person was her grandmother. And her grandmother would say to her in the evenings, "Don't worry what anybody else says, because you are loved. You are loved by me, and you are loved by God." And she would reiterate that 3 times. You are loved, you are loved, you are loved. And Hannah took that message and took her branding and moved it into a mark. And you can read about Hannah's mark and Hannah's story over at the tent. So I want to take just a couple of minutes and answer any of the questions you have. If you are interested in the show coming to see you, find me. I'm happy to talk with you about that, and we can talk logistics and all that crazy stuff. The last thing I want to add on is we are actually building a gallery for our website that is about the people here at the Wild Goose Festival that have faith marks of their own. So if you have a faith mark, it doesn't have to be faith-based. I mean, we've got representatives in the show that are Buddhist, that are agnostic, that are Jewish. You don't have to be a Christian to have a faith mark. You have to have a spiritual connection to the ink on your body. And so if you've got a faith mark and you want to be photographed, we've got a photographer on site. We're going to give you a piece of paper. You can tell your story. You can email it to us next week, and we're going to build a whole gallery online about the marks of faith that are seen here at the Wild Goose Festival. So stop by and get your picture taken too. If you want to see the show, if you want to get your picture taken, or if you want to just come talk to us. So, anybody have any questions? Anybody have anything they want to know that I didn't speak to? Nobody? Nobody wants me to talk about Leviticus? I mean, I'm okay with that, trust me. But usually that's the first question that comes out of everybody's mouth. Well, what about the passage in Scripture that says that we're,
Have you had any opposition? Have you had anybody come to you and say what you're doing is wrong? Or
have I had anybody come to me and say what I'm doing is wrong?
Have you had any opposition?
I have not had anyone personally walk up to me and say, "We don't like what you're doing." Social media, however, is an interesting beast. And I can't tell you the number of people that have posted. I would say we get 1 or 2 posts a month on our Facebook page or Twitter feed, just saying, "Hey, this popped up in my feed," or "Hey, I saw that my daughter liked this page." And I mean, we've got 11,000 followers on Facebook. We have a ton of Twitter followers. So we post people's faith marks all the time. So I have people from all over the world that send me pictures of their faith marks, and then we post them on our Facebook page and we tell their story. So you don't have to be able to be photographed to have your image and your story told worldwide. I have not had a lot of opposition, but I do have people that challenge me online. I think that's just the nature of the beast. Any other questions? We're about ready to wrap up. Well, thank you guys. Again, feel free to come and chat with us. We're literally across the street. The tent is set up. We partnered with a really great group of artists from Asheville that are doing temporary ink. They're happy to give you some temporary ink to take back with you. It's all hand drawn. It'll last about 3 weeks. It's beautiful. Or just come and see us at the tent. And I've got postcards, I've got brochures, I've got stuff you can take back with you. So if you're thinking that you might have a community center or church or a university that you know that might want to feature this show for a couple of weeks, just come and grab some literature and take it back with you. I'm happy to talk with you about it. So, thank you guys.